They tied them so damn tight, you know. You try to fight, it just cuts into you.
How could you just kill a 12-year-old in the middle of a very busy intersection and no one knows anything? How can that be?
Their bodies were tossed by public roadsides, almost as if to taunt officers.
We were being told that these were isolated incidents. They were working on them.
Hello, everybody. I'm here with another installment of Unsolved, Unbelievable, Unknown. Our topic today is going to be a difficult one for me to research, much less talk about. I do want to make it clear that all of the victims in today's episode are children, as are some of the victims in other episodes. This will not become a series where we just cover cases involving children, but I wanted to state this so that anyone who may feel queasy about listening to such a discussion can stop now if they wish. Fair warning. Today we're going to discuss the Oakland County Child Killer, a series of crimes which took place in the Detroit area during 1976 and 1977. The victims were almost exclusively African American children between the ages of 10 and 13 years old. There were 4 murders and 1 attempted murder. During this time period, there were thousands of children living in Oakland County, Michigan, in the Detroit area, and only 5 were taken by whoever was responsible for these crimes. All 5 victims were abducted from the street while walking home from school or other activities. 3 of them were found dead near the area from which they had been taken. 1 was found dead in a wooded area approximately 2 miles from where she had been taken. Another victim was found dead in an area of Clinton Township, quite a distance away from where she lived. She had been reported missing several weeks earlier. And yet another victim survived her abduction, although she was seriously injured and spent several days in a coma. At the time, many suspected that the killer might have been the same person responsible for several other similar murders which had taken place over the last decade in the area. However, none of those cases were ever officially linked to the Oakland County killings, although the press at the time sensationalized the case, focusing on the county's white population. The Oakland County Sheriff's Office insisted that race was not a motive in the crimes. 4 of the 5 victims were African American, the one exception being a 12-year-old Christine Kaplewski, who was Polish American. The first abduction occurred on February 4, 1976. That was when 13-year-old Timothy King was returning home from a friend's house. He had been out playing basketball. As he walked along the street, a man driving a van offered him a ride. Timothy agreed to go home, but once they got to his house, the man told him that he actually wanted to take him somewhere else. He tied up Timothy with electrical cord and forced him into the back of the van, and then the driver drove away. After Timothy had been gone for a couple of hours, his mother contacted the police to report him missing. Searchers found his body near a service road alongside Interstate 75, less than a mile from his home. He had died from multiple blows to the head from a heavy object, although there was no direct evidence linking the death of Timothy King to any other crime. Authorities began to suspect that Timothy was the victim of a serial killer. The reason for this was that beginning around 1968, there had been a series of homicides in the area in which the victims had also been beaten with a heavy object. In most of the cases, the victims had also been sexually assaulted. These crimes were committed between 1968 and 1970 by someone known as the Detroit Ripper. However, the killer or killers were never caught and the cases went cold. And then, in 1976, the crimes started again. Timothy S. murder prompted a massive investigation and people began to wonder if perhaps the Detroit Ripper was still active. By February 1977, there had been 3 additional murders in Oakland County and 1 more girl had been taken but was still missing. On March 17, 1976, 14-year-old Alberta Campbell left her home to buy some groceries. She was never seen again. 2 months later, her skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave in an area of White Lake Township. She had suffered severe head trauma and had been buried in the area where she had been killed. On June 13, 1976, 10-year-old Mark Stebbins was playing baseball with some friends after school. He was hit in the head with a ball and fell to the ground unconscious. When he awoke, he found himself lying inside a van and a man was kneeling beside him. Apparently, Mark had been taken to a secluded area where the killer had kept him for several hours. The killer tried to assault Mark, but Mark fought back and managed to escape. He ran to a nearby house and called the police. The man pursued him, but the man was unsuccessful in finding Mark and was scared off by the arrival of police cars. The man was described as 5 feet 8 inches tall with a slender build, dark hair, and a mustache. He was wearing a blue shirt, blue jeans, and brown shoes. He was driving a green van with tinted windows. Despite an extensive search, the man was never found and the attack went unsolved. On October 23, 1976, 11-year-old Giselle Christian was walking home from school when she disappeared. Her body was found the following day in a heavily wooded area. An autopsy revealed that she had been struck on the head several times and had been strangled with a ligature. In January 1977, a 4th child was taken. 10-year-old Jill Robinson was abducted while walking home from school. A witness saw a man carrying her into a waiting car, and then the car drove off. Her body was discovered in an area of Clinton Township, nearly 20 miles from her home. Like Giselle Christian, Jill had been struck on the head and then strangled. Jill's murder received extensive media coverage. Oakland County Sheriff's officials made a public appeal for information leading to the arrest and conviction of her killer. They also announced that they believed that the same person was responsible for the murders of Timothy, Alberta, and Giselle. On February 25, 1977, a resident of Roseville, Michigan spotted a young girl walking along a busy street. At first he thought that she looked like 13-year-old Kim Hopper, who had gone missing in September 1974. The girl entered a supermarket and the man immediately contacted the police. It turned out that the girl was not Kim Hopper. Instead, it was Cheryl Santofsky, who had been missing since October 1976. Cheryl told the police that she had been kidnapped by a man who drove a green van. She said that she had been held captive for 8 days, but had managed to escape. Cheryl's story was consistent with the stories of the other victims, and she was certain that the man who had attacked her was the same man responsible for the other crimes. Cheryl was interviewed on the Phil Donahue Show, and her reward for providing information leading to the capture of her kidnapper was a brand new car. Unfortunately, the kidnapper was never found and the case remains unsolved. There have been countless theories as to who might be responsible for the crimes. Names have been suggested, but without hard evidence, nothing has ever stuck. Some have blamed members of the family. Others have blamed individuals who were already in prison for other crimes. Even satanic cults have been blamed. One thing which has always struck me as odd is that even though this was the height of the hippie era and people were using illegal substances freely, there have been 0 witnesses to any of these crimes except for the attempted abduction of Mark Stabbins. There were no motorists who happened to see anything. No one saw a green van driving erratically or noticed any suspicious activity. In fact, despite the fact that several of these children were murdered in broad daylight, there were no witnesses at all. People heard noises and screams, but they assumed that they were coming from animals. What makes this case particularly gruesome is that in every instance, the killer chose his victim very carefully. He took children who walked alone, and he specifically targeted children who were well-liked by their peers. Those children who had been chosen had certain things in common. They were described as polite, trustworthy, and helpful. It is believed that the killer watched his victims for some time before selecting them. He also chose areas where he knew that the children would be alone. The children who were taken had come from good families. Their parents had no criminal record and there was no indication that any of the victims had ever been in trouble themselves. So it would seem that the motive behind the crimes was not robbery, rape, or revenge. All of the victims had been bludgeoned and all of the girls had been strangled, indicating that the killer wanted to ensure that his victims would remain quiet. In 1978, the FBI began investigating the case. They brought in outside experts to assist in determining whether the killings were racially motivated or whether they could have been the work of a cult. Both theories were discounted. The case grew colder and colder until Cheryl Santofsky came forward and identified a possible suspect. She identified a man named Dennis Rubotella as the man who had kidnapped her and whom she believed was responsible for the other crimes as well. However, although Cheryl's story was consistent, she admitted that she couldn't absolutely say that it was him. Batalla was arrested and underwent a lie detector test, which he passed, and he was never charged with any of the crimes. To date, no one has ever been charged. I think that this is a case which will never be solved unless someone comes forward with new information. It seems highly unlikely that the truth will ever be uncovered. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please remember to follow before you go. Thank you very much for listening and have a nice night.